Film number 9, Happy. Are we destroying the planet in a misguided pursuit of happiness? Happy is not an environmental film. Why then are we watching it? Well, lately I've been thinking a lot about what may be the greatest irony of the human race. If we do not survive the climate crisis, it will be a sad epitaph for our species. From even before Plato, thinkers in the West have long pondered what constitutes the, quote, good life. In the United States, we've been preoccupied with the question ever since we declared ourselves an independent country and made the, quote, pursuit of happiness one of 3 unalienable rights in our Declaration of Independence. What now constitutes the good life in the U.S.? In other words, how are we pursuing happiness? The American dream now seems to center on wanting more, wanting bigger, wanting better. More stuff, bigger houses, cars, etc. The problem is that this has not at all made us happy. In recent decades, Americans have become less and less happy. While this would be a sad irony in itself, the great tragedy is that many of these pursuits are destroying our planet. Americans put nearly a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. Indeed, at the same time that Americans have become less and less happy, we have been pumping more and more greenhouses into our planet's atmosphere. What is in many ways even worse is that we are now exporting this environmentally, disastrous aspect of the American dream, the American way of life, to the rest of the planet. It would be one thing if we were releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere for more noble reasons, such as to ensure that everyone on the planet received enough to eat. But this is all largely unnecessary. Do we really need 60 or more items of new clothing every year? In short, we have phonetically and futilely been pursuing happiness at the cost of the planet. As noted above, the great irony is that as greenhouse gas emissions, soared as the result of our pursuit of happiness, our happiness has actually declined. So here's my question. Are we indeed destroying our planet in a profoundly misguided pursuit of happiness? In order to wrestle with this question, let's look at happiness compared to greenhouse gas emissions for a number of pretty happy countries. First, it's true. After many decades of studying depression and unhappiness, a range of scholars, from sociologists and psychologists, have recently turned their attention to happiness, as had the United Nations. The United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, using Gallup poll data, released the World Happiness Report in 2019. The report revealed that the United States ranked number 19 worldwide in terms of happiness. With respect to the climate crisis, we emit about 16 metric tons of CO2 per person every year, which gives us the dubious distinction of being one of the world's leaders when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. Alternately, the 5 countries with the happiest people on the planet, and that's Finland, Denmark, Norway, Iceland, and the Netherlands, all have individual emissions that are, on average, about half of the United States. In fact, in spite of the fact that they are all in very northern climates and hence use quite a bit of energy just for heating. In fact, a whopping 81% of Finland's greenhouse gas emissions comes from the energy sector, which is hardly surprising as the capital of Finland, which of course is Helsinki, is further north than the capital of Alaska, which is Juneau. In general, living in a cold climate demands far more energy than living in a warmer one, even now that air conditioners are widely used in the latter. One study found that living in Minneapolis demanded 3.5 times more energy than living in Miami. Living in places that are even further north consumes even more energy. Energy-related carbon dioxide emissions for the average Alaskan are twice as large as for the average person in the U.S. Moving from Finland is the sixth most happy country in the world. Switzerland, on average, per capita greenhouse gas emissions there are 1/3 of the United States, in spite of the fact that it too is not a very warm place. 2/3 of Switzerland are in the Alps mountain range. Number 7 on the list of happy countries is Sweden, also a pretty cold place. Sweden's capital, Stockholm, is also further north than Juneau, Alaska. Nonetheless, their per capita greenhouse gas emissions are approximately 1/4 of the United States. So let's pause on that for a moment. The 7 countries on the planet with the happiest people, in spite of demanding significant energy use because of their northern locales, they have climate footprints that are half, 1/3, or 1/4 ours. The climate footprints of happy people can be even smaller if they live in warmer climates. Costa Rica, which ranks number 12 in terms of worldwide happiness, hence Costa Ricans are significantly happier than U.S. citizens at number 19, has greenhouse gas emissions that are only about 1/6 of the United States. That's right. The average American contributes as much to the climate crisis as 1/7, as 7 pretty happy people in Costa Rica. The example of Costa Rica reveals an interesting element here, as the average American is 13 times wealthier than the average person in Costa Rica, as measured by mean wealth per adult. As our relative climate footprints reveal, we Americans are presumably using quite a bit of this wealth in ways that are damaging the planet. However, with respect to income, let's face facts. It's difficult to be happy if you are very poor. If you're trying to raise a family in the U.S. on an annual income of, say, $40,000 per year, a range of hardships will certainly threaten your happiness. However, the studies have found that beyond a certain point, more money does not bring greater happiness. That number may be lower than you would imagine, as these studies revealed it's around $75,000 a year in annual income for an individual, which is still high. And this is more than the annual median income in the U.S., but it's certainly not Kardashian wealth. Moreover, no one, to my knowledge, has attempted to isolate and remove the influence of overwhelming marketing bombarding us, which tells us daily or hourly or even by the minute online that we need to buy a range of things to make us happy. So let's return to the example of Costa Rica, as it reveals, simply put, that you don't need a lot of money to be happy. Nor does greater happiness necessarily come from, comparatively, a relatively high climate footprint. Now, let's return to those very happy but very cold Scandinavian countries. For the most part, their economies and cultures are built on something called the Nordic model. While these are, of course, democratic countries, they also very much embrace things like collective bargaining and strong unions. Hence, they're sometimes called democratic socialist countries. Bernie Sanders nicely explains what these countries offer. So I'm quoting Bernie Sanders here. Quote, "So long as we know that what democratic socialism is, if we know that in countries like Scandinavian countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they're very democratic countries, obviously, the voter turnout is a lot higher than it is in the United States. In those countries, healthcare is a right of all people. And in those countries, college education, graduate school is free. In those countries, retirement benefits, child care are stronger than in the United States of America. And in those countries, by and large, government works for ordinary people in the middle class rather than, as in the case of our country, and that's the U.S. right now, the billionaire class." Even though we might think that happiness is a deeply personal matter, government has a major role to play in facilitating our pursuit of happiness. When they are doing their job responsibly, caring for the well-being of their citizens rather than large corporate sponsors, we are likely to be much happier. But specifically, how are people in these Scandinavian countries happier, and how does this relate to the climate crisis? So let's look at Sweden. Recall that the average Swede is considerably happier than the average American, even though their climate footprints are 1/4 of ours. The average person in Sweden, who makes almost as much as the average person in the U.S., works 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. That's right. The average work week is 30 hours. Only a very tiny percentage of those people, 1%, work more than 50 hours per week. In contrast, 40% of Americans work more than 50 hours per week. Half of them work more than 60 hours per week. Hence, 1 in 5 Americans literally works twice as many hours as the average person in Sweden. Everyone in Sweden receives 25 paid vacation days per year, and larger companies typically offer more. All parents receive 480 days of paid paternity leave to split between them. As there are 235 working days per year, and that's 52 weeks times 5 days minus 25 vacation days, that's 1 year of paternity leave per parent. There are, of course, differences between Sweden and the U.S. that impact their climate footprint. For example, Sweden currently relies more on nuclear energy than the U.S. However, over a third of their electricity comes from hydroelectric sources, a whopping 3 times more than the U.S. In terms of consumption, rather than production, we have twice as many cars per person as they do. Our houses are, on average, roughly twice as large as theirs. I'm not saying that life in Sweden is perfect. There are problems there too, like everywhere. But just look at the relative climate impact between Sweden and the U.S. Everything else being equal, the average Swede has a carbon footprint that's a quarter of the average American's. But everything here is not equal, as this is a much colder climate. Americans living in comparable climate, Alaska, are emitting twice as much carbon dioxide as our nation's average. Hence, adjusted for their colder climate, the average Swede may well be emitting something like 1/8 of the average American's greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, the average person in Sweden is responsible for 4.5 metric tons of CO2 per year. If, for reasons of argument, we adjusted that for the average American climate, U.S. climate, it would then get cut in half to around 2.25 metric tons of CO2 for each American, which would be right around where we need to be to meet the goals of the Paris Accord signed at COP21. Of course, these are, quick back-of-the-napkin calculations. But people in wealthy countries can and do not only get by and live quite well with relatively small amounts of carbon footprints. In terms of our current discussion, they can also live happier lives than most Americans. We're often told that adapting to climate change will mean that we need to have, drab lives of deprivation and require us to do without quite a bit stuff. However, if we make this sort of changes that we've been looking at in this course, we might come out the other end, decades from now, happier. I'll leave you with this question, and let's go to the class discussion of happy, and here's the first quotes. Let's start with the quote from actor Jim Carrey. This is Carrey. I think everyone should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that this is not the answer. Close quote. The difficulty is that many people will simply not hear Carrey's message, as the following comment perceptibly notes. Next comment. While the message of the film has good intentions, I would find it difficult to convince those who are in deep struggle or poverty that money won't give happiness. Security is an amazing feeling, and the United States is apparently not, it's not a right for everyone to be housed or for basic income, close quote. Yeah, so the American dream of unbridled consumption and correspondingly unbridled greenhouse gas emissions is so ubiquitous thanks to many decades of tireless work by marketers on behalf of seemingly countless corporations that it looms large for a large swath of Americans, perhaps especially for people in economically disadvantaged situations. Simply put, we believe that money buys happiness through, for example, the acquisition of things, because we have endlessly been preached that mantra by marketers. And, of course, scores of influencers confirm it to be true. But there's another issue here, which this comment aptly addresses and introduces. Money promises to create a sense of security for people who feel precariously perched economically. Faced with the prospect of being unhoused, which can quickly become a reality for even middle-income Americans, see the movie Nomadland for some dramatic insight into how this could come about. It should come as no surprise that security, if not luxury, is an ideal for many Americans. However, as this comment notes, this is in part because we live in a country where it is not, for example, as this person aptly notes, quote, a right for everyone to be housed, nor, I would add, a right to health care, a right to education, and a range of additional services, and importantly, safety nets. Quote, security is an amazingly comforting feeling, close quote, when you live in a system that does not provide it. In other words, we each individually aggregate wealth because we do not have adequate safety nets to provide for us if something goes wrong, such as if we have some sort of catastrophic illness. Because, we do not have health insurance. The difficulty, of course, is that this can be seen as a systemic failure, as we wouldn't need this type of security if we had a system that provided for the well-being of everyone, including, during examples like this, like collapse of healthcare. So the next quote. One of my favorite quotes from the film is, with happiness, the more you have, the more everyone has. I think the statement is a stark contrast with our concept of money and material wealth. I also believe that this statement symbolizes humans' motivation for cooperation rather than the motivation for competition between one another. It's the end of that quote. Yeah, this comment gets straight to one of the central issues here. The acquisition of material wealth, as it plays out in the U.S., is at root a competition, a fierce competition. We admire and celebrate the Kardashians and people like Elon Musk, currently the richest person on the planet. And of course, we all wish that we could be winners like them. Conversely, the people that lose in this competition lose big. People without houses being an obvious example, being unhoused. Not only will your life likely be miserable if you are unhoused in the U.S., you will, compared to the average American, likely die nearly 20 years earlier if you are a man, and almost 30 years earlier if you are a woman. Because the stakes are so high, let's face it, our lives are at stake. We are encouraged to go all out in this competition. After all, losing potentially means losing everything, even our lives. Many people will argue that this competition is simply nature, that this is human nature at work. Dog eat dog, survival of the fittest, and all that. However, a range of researchers, such as Dacre Kettner, the director of the Social Intervention Lab at UC Berkeley and the author of the book Born to be Good, The Science of a Meaningful Life, argue that the positive emotions and cooperation are hardwired into human beings. It's simple enough. Throughout human history, across a range of different cultures, people have cared for one another. In short, cooperation, compassion, and kindness are cornerstones of our species. This is how we have survived and succeeded, as we are at root a social animal. In other words, we have succeeded as a species because, and we all stand to benefit individually when, we cooperate with one another rather than compete. Unfortunately, an all-out consumer society like ours flourishes because of competition. We want to make a display of the fact that we have more and better things than everyone else. From our point of view, we want the world to know that we have competed and won. From the point of view of marketers, it matters little who wins and who loses. What matters to them is that we all consume far more than we need in order to stay in the competition. Expressed another way, not only are they in the business of making things and providing services, they're in the business of keeping the competition alive. After all, if we didn't buy what they were selling, and more to the point, buy into the idea that we actually need it, there'd be little or no competition. So, as odd as it may sound, compassion and cooperation will be essential in mitigating the climate crisis, insofar as we need to dramatically reduce this odd and disastrous competition of seeing who can cause more greenhouse gas emissions to be emitted in the bargain. As Dacre-Keltner and others have argued, we stand to become much happier as individuals and as a species. The following comment further argues for the importance of cooperation and teamwork. So this is the next quote. I could not help but make connections to the climate crisis while watching this film. The film highlights the higher levels of happiness human beings can achieve when working as a community or team. The climate crisis is going to take an unprecedented amount of teamwork to be addressed effectively. Through breaking down our fetishized relationship with the individual, we can work to attain higher levels of cohesion in our society that will work to our benefit when addressing the climate crisis. This climate-aware community could not only be a strong force of climate action, but also serve to uplift the happiness in each and every person. The film provides the example of Okinawa, Japan, and people's ability to work as a cohesive unit there. Although not directed at the climate, this unification of people that are addressed in the betterment of things other than their own personal wealth can be a powerful framework to follow in the years to come. Yeah, so in the documentary Happy, Okinawa serves as this sort of shining example of, as this person notes, people's ability to work as a cohesive unit. Although the comparison between Okinawa and Japan breaks down pretty quickly and is arguably in some ways inaccurate and unfair, the filmmakers seem to want to offer up Okinawa as an alternative to the consumerist society where people work long hours in the pursuit of happiness, yet are not at all happy. In this sense, Japan, in this example, serves as a stand-in for the U.S. in the American dream that, we are selling to the world. So in any event, the example of Okinawa suggests, as this person aptly notes, that the unification of peoples that are interested in the betterment of things other than their own personal wealth can be a powerful framework to follow in the years to come. That's the end of that quote again. In other words, while we often hear that we live in a dog-eat-dog world where only the fittest survive, Okinawa and plenty of additional cultures across the planet make clear that this is not the only way of being in the world for our species. In response to the previous comment, we noted that a range of theorists, such as the aforementioned Dacre-Keltner of UC Berkeley, suggest that we will have happier lives if we live in a culture built on cooperation rather than competition. Okinawa provides a real-life example of how this can work. If the film is to be believed, apparently it works quite well. The following comment continues with this theme of cooperation. So this is the next comment. The part of the documentary that stood out the most to me was the co-housing opportunities in Denmark. It is such a counterculture lifestyle when we consider it in a rather greedy American context, yet I found it to be a very attractive idea. It made sense in every way I could think of. It's more practical as it gives us more time, since chores and cooking are shared responsibilities. It provides community to watch over your children and extra helping hands. It also appears to be more fun. It sort of combines the best parts of college, where you can be living in close proximity to many friends while still having your own space, with the best parts of adulthood, growing a community with friends and raising a family. I found myself wishing I had grown up in Denmark, where there is additionally free healthcare and public education through college. People in Denmark might not have their own room in a giant house or even their own car, but they seem to be just as happy as Americans, and most likely even happier. There's a lot to be learned from Denmark. I believe that if they can live fulfilling lives and more sustainable lives, so can we here in the U.S. So, regarding the previous two comments, how could we, in practical, real-life terms, foster less competition, and greater cooperation between human beings? What would that look like? Yes, there's the example of Okinawa, which suggests that there are cultures that have cooperation as one of their cornerstones. But how do you engineer something like this in a wealthy country like the United States? As this person argues, the example of co-housing in Denmark from the documentary Happy provides a compelling answer. In co-housing communities, people who are not related live together for both their own personal good as well as for the good of everyone else there. Indeed, personal happiness and health is intimately related to the health of the community. Such a community can, as this comment notes, combine the best part of college, where you get to live in close proximity with many friends, while still living in your own space, with the best part of adulthood, growing a community with friends and raising a family. Co-housing communities are arguably considerably better than college in terms of living conditions, as they carefully vet people and families before they join the community. So, on a personal note, a few years ago, my partner, daughter, and I visited and shared a communal dinner in a co-housing community here in California, which is in fact just 80 miles north of Santa Barbara. They are all around. It was a very pleasant experience, though it was very clear that the community as a whole was interested in getting to know anyone potentially moving into the community to make sure that it was a good fit for everyone involved, which is kind of a cornerstone here and important. So the next quote. This film was purposefully made and made well. Its deep and scientific approach to happiness intrigued me and made me analyze myself. I was curious to see what others had to say about this article, and as I was reading the comments, I saw a lot of the same thoughts as mine. The film made me think, and ultimately I decided that a lot of the things in my life that I thought made me happy are just not doing it. Of course, I got the message that materialism doesn't make me happy, but that wasn't a big takeaway for me. I began to realize during this film that happiness needs to come from the mundane. It doesn't come from Mexico trips or Disney World or going to a party. It should come from the things I do every day. It was so amazing to see everyone's perspective on this. The analysis of happiness is always an important facet of life. I've really enjoyed this connection, of course. I love how it somehow fits right into the material, even though it is not outwardly tied to the climate crisis. This is such an important moment in all of our lives. We have so much time in life to make change, and this is the time where we get to figure out what makes us happy. Like the woman who was run over by a truck, that's in the film, of course. Motivation is key. Everyone has something that can motivate them to push through and forge a better life, and hopefully I and we all can find that soon. End of the quote. First, this comment wonderfully underscores the importance of reading what other people in our class have to say about the films and readings. In particular, this person notes that, of course, I got the message that materialism doesn't make me happy, but that wasn't the big takeaway. I began to realize during this film that happiness needs to come from the mundane. It was so amazing to see everyone's perspective on this. So, as the late Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh notes, the present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If you are attentive, you will see it. In other words, we're always striving after what we think will make us happy, whether it is some sort of object, like a new phone or car, or some sort of trip or experience. For example, as this person notes, a trip to Mexico or Disney World, or going to a party. This is an important observation, as we're often told, sometimes by minimalists, that we should stop pursuing material objects and instead pursue experiences. However, as this person notes, happiness can indeed be found even in the mundane. Finally, this person, quite interestingly, speaks directly to the rest of the class, more to the point, speaks to your generation, noting that, and this is a quote, "This is such an important moment in our lives. We have so much time in life to make change, and this is the time where we get to figure out what makes us happy." So, simply put, As the great majority of people in our class are around 20 years old, give or take a couple years, you should see this, as this person notes, as a decisive moment in life, as this is when you get to decide just how you are going to live. This impacts you personally as you, to use this person's apt phrase, quote, get to figure out what makes us happy, what makes you happy. But you also get to figure out how to live in an environmental way and a climate sustainable way, as a matter that's generous and compassionate. So I'm going to end on that note, because I think it's such an interesting observation and an important note.